So today's topic is force majeure versus unforeseen events. There is a very thin difference between these both, which you might get confused often. So let's see whether we can get a clarity in these two terms. Force majeure are unforeseeable external events preventing contractual obligations. Unforeseen events are unpredicted events, not usually foreseen initially. See, even in force majeure, even if they are not foreseeable at that time, but due to previous experience, we might have populated that in the force majeure class. For example, natural disasters, wars, government actions beyond control. Unforeseen events are things like economic shifts, market changes, unanticipated events. For example, let's take COVID. COVID was a pandemic. Before COVID, I don't think 99% of the contracts which I have experienced never had the word pandemic. It had the word epidemic because there was no pandemic for the past century which was not known to everyone. But now after COVID, if you see everywhere, the force majeure class will have a pandemic. So that's how force majeure class works. Causation, external factors rendering performance impossible for any of the party or both the parties. Here, unforeseen events, you cannot just say it's an external factor. It might be an internal factor also. And it may cause disruption. Okay, what is the contractual provisions when it comes to the remedies? Force majeure clause usually gives a very clear clarifications on the remedies or the entitlement towards time and cost to both the parties, and whether they have an exposure to LD or they don't have an exposure to LD, whether the cost compensation is must, and they sometimes categorize the force measures as political force measure, non-political force measures, etc. So contractual provisions remedies impact the parties' rights on time and cost. Unforeseen conditions, it varies by the contract. Some contracts may not even have this clause, and some contract may have this clause but not have the clear remedies over the unforeseen events, because you cannot gauge an unforeseen event because even this event was unforeseen historically or from the lessons learned. So negotiation must be needed for the unforeseen conditions to prove that this is truly an unforeseen condition and this is not a factor was known to the parties before. So what is the contractual impact? See, usually force majeure immediately triggers suspension, and over a long period of time, it gives the rights to both the parties to terminate if they are not able to perform. So that is the usual provision of the force majeure clause. And when it comes to unforeseen events, we need adjustments to the contract, negotiations. If the contract conditions has to be changed, they can be changed. So examples of this force measures are disasters, earthquakes. I think we have a separate video for the types of force measures, so you can have a look on that to have better understanding of this. And I'm sorry for my voice, I got cold. And so wars, political reasons, riots, like strikes beyond the controls, and like an industry that doesn't have the control for us. For example, the entire EPC industry is dependent on a global supply chain. If something affects the global supply chain, it affects the any EPC project, like the latest disruption we got in chips and the COVID rollovers of chips. I worked as a contract manager the COVID period, and you have that project has a very large dependency on China and Europe for the materials, and you might have a schedule of ship that this material is going to be picked by this ship on so and so date. You know the ETA. The ship will come. We will keep tracking the ship. The ship will come. For example, if it has to pick the material from Babylon, it will come to Babylon. It will not pick the material. You cannot ask anything. You will not have, if you see that the metal is ready and it has customs clearance is done and it is waiting in the warehouse to be uploaded. I think it's CFS. But the ships or the vessels will not take, and you don't have any control over that. And they may have any reasons to not pick the material. So this happened very often during the COVID period. So those things are, you cannot take that as a force measure, but that's a for sure, there are unforeseen conditions. So what are the other things comes under unforeseen conditions or recessions, huge recessions, technical breakthroughs, like we said in the chip manufacturing. These are very unforeseen conditions which uh, you cannot predict. They are purposely keeping the differences very minimalistic so that you can have an understanding. If you go detail, it may again end up in confusions. Mitigations may be required. May be required in the sense, if possible, the party has to mitigate the effects. And it has to prove that if it can't mitigate, that it is out of its control. And coming to unforeseen conditions, that it has to be adapted. That's why we saw that it varies with the contract, and the contract has to be adjusted. So if it has to be adjusted, it has to be adjusted, and it has to be adapted and move forward to complete the project. I hope this session could have given you an insight about the minor differences between a force majeure event and an unforeseen event. See you in other video. Thank you. Bye.